The sky above Geneva burned orange and red as Cale Morrow pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall and tried to catch his breath. His rifle clutched tight against his chest while explosions shook the ground beneath his boots and sent dust raining down from the ceiling of the underground bunker. He was 34 years old, and he had been a soldier for 12 of those years. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. Nothing had prepared any of them for the end of everything they had ever known. The year was 2847, and humanity was dying. 3 days ago, the Vracthory Dominion had arrived in Earth's orbit with a fleet so massive that it had blocked out the sun over half the planet. And they had come with one simple purpose that they announced to every human on every channel and frequency available to them. They had come to make humanity extinct. The Vracthory were not alone in their hatred, for they led a coalition of 7 alien species who had watched humanity spread across the stars for the past 500 years and had grown afraid of what they saw. Afraid of how fast humans adapted and learned and conquered every challenge placed before them to the Dominion. Humanity was a disease that needed to be burned away before it could infect the entire galaxy. Cale wiped blood from a cut above his eye and looked around at the men and women huddled in the bunker with him, their faces lit by the flickering emergency lights that painted everything in shades of crimson and shadow. And he counted only 19 soldiers left from a company that had numbered over 200 just that morning. "Sergeant Morrow," a voice called out through the chaos, and Cale turned to see General Una Okonkwo pushing her way through the debris toward him. Her silver hair matted with blood and dust, but her dark eyes still burning with a fire that refused to die. She was 63 years old, and she had led the defense of Geneva from the moment the first Vracthory dropships had pierced the atmosphere, rallying soldiers and civilians alike with a courage that had inspired everyone who witnessed it. "General," Cale said as he moved to meet her, ducking instinctively as another explosion rocked the bunker and sent cracks spreading across the ceiling above them. "We need to evacuate now, or this whole place is going to come down on our heads." The general nodded, but she did not move toward the exit tunnels. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out something that made Cale's heart stop in his chest. It was a flag, folded into a neat triangle, despite the chaos that surrounded them. And even in the dim light, Cale could see the familiar pattern of colors that every human child learned to recognize before they could walk the flag of Earth, the banner that had flown over the United Nations building since the day humanity had finally united under one government 3 centuries ago. "I pulled this from the rubble myself," the general said as she pressed the flag into Cale's hands, her voice steady even as the world collapsed around them. "It survived the first bombardment, and I will not let it be destroyed now." Cale looked down at the flag in his hands and felt tears burning in his eyes, for he understood what this piece of cloth represented. Understood that it was more than just fabric and thread. It was the last piece of home that any of them might ever hold. "Why are you giving this to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. General Okonkwo placed her hand on his shoulder and looked into his eyes with an intensity that burned itself into his memory forever. "Because someone has to remember what we were," she said. "Someone has to carry this forward and show the galaxy that we existed, that we mattered, that we were more than just another species that the Dominion decided to erase." Before Cale could respond, the ceiling at the far end of the bunker exploded inward, and Vracthory soldiers poured through the breach, their tall insectoid bodies moving with terrifying speed as they raised their plasma rifles and opened fire. "Get to the tunnels," the general shouted as she raised her own weapon and began firing back, her shots taking down 2 of the aliens before they could advance further. "That is an order, Sergeant." Cale wanted to stay and fight beside her, wanted to stand his ground and die with honor like a soldier should. But he felt the weight of the flag in his hands and knew that he had been given a mission. More important than his own life, he grabbed the nearest soldiers and pushed them toward the tunnel entrance, shouting for them to move faster as plasma bolts screamed past their heads and filled the air with the smell of burning. Not 11 of them made it into the tunnel before the entrance collapsed behind them, sealing them in darkness and cutting them off from the battle above. Kale heard the general's voice one last time through his communicator, calm and steady even as the sounds of combat grew louder around her. "Make them remember us," she said. And then there was only silence. They ran through the ancient sewer tunnels beneath Geneva for hours, guided only by the dim light of their helmet lamps and the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Vraktari forces above one. They finally emerged on the outskirts of the ruined city. The sun was setting over a landscape that looked like something from a nightmare, with fires burning in every direction and smoke rising to meet the alien warships that still hung in the sky. Like dark omens of death, Kale gathered his small group around him and looked at each of their faces, seeing fear and grief and exhaustion reflected back at him. And he knew that they were all thinking the same thing. Was there any point in running when there was nowhere left to run to? As if in answer to their despair, a Vraktari broadcast suddenly crackled through every communicator and speaker still functioning in the area. The harsh alien voice speaking in perfect English that it had learned specifically for this moment. "Attention all remaining human forces," the voice declared. "The species known as Homo sapiens has been officially designated as extinct by order of the High Archons of the Vraktari Dominion. All resistance is futile, and any survivors will be hunted down and eliminated. Your civilization is over. Your history is erased. Your very existence will be forgotten." The broadcast ended, and silence fell over the small group of survivors, broken only by the distant sounds of destruction that continued to echo across the burning city. Kale looked down at the flag still clutched in his hands, at the colors that represented everything humanity had ever been and ever hoped to be. And he felt something stir in his chest that was stronger than fear and more powerful than despair. "They think we are extinct," he thought as he carefully tucked the flag into his pack. "They think they have won, but they are wrong." He turned to face his small band of survivors and saw that same spark of defiance beginning to flicker in their eyes. Saw that same refusal to accept the death sentence that had been pronounced upon their entire species. "We move north," Kale said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had just discovered his purpose. "There are emergency evacuation ships hidden in the mountain bases, and if even one of them is still intact, then we are getting off this planet." "And then what?" one of the soldiers asked, her voice trembling but her eyes hard with determination. Kale shouldered his rifle and began walking toward the distant mountains, toward whatever slim hope remained for humanity in a galaxy that had decided they deserved to die. "And then we find the others," he said without looking back, "because I refuse to believe that we are the last humans left alive, and I refuse to let them forget us." The 11 survivors followed him into the gathering darkness, and somewhere in his pack, the last flag of Earth waited for the day it would fly again. 6 months had passed since Earth fell. 6 months of running and hiding and surviving in the dark corners of a galaxy that had declared humanity dead and forgotten. Kale Morrow sat in the cargo hold of a stolen smuggler ship and watched the stars drift past the small viewport, his hand resting on the pack that contained the flag he had carried across a dozen worlds and through more danger than he had ever imagined possible. Of the 11 survivors who had escaped Geneva with him, only 7 remained. The others lost to Vraktari patrols and bounty hunters and the simple cruelty of a universe that seemed determined to finish what the Dominion had started. They had traveled through the lawless regions of space where even the Vraktari did not bother to patrol, hiding among smugglers and pirates and species so small and insignificant that the great powers of the galaxy barely noticed their existence, and everywhere they went. Kale searched for signs that other humans had survived. The rumors had started slowly at first. Whispers passed between traitors and criminals who had no reason to lie. Stories of humans seen working in Vrac-3 mining colonies and slave camps. Stories of children hidden by alien merchants who had been touched by human kindness. In years past, each rumor sent Kale and his small band racing across the stars, following trails that sometimes led nowhere and sometimes led to horrors that haunted their dreams. They had found humans in the waste processing plants of Velthax-3, worked nearly to death by Vrac-3 overseers who laughed at the idea that these broken creatures had once reached for the stars. They had found humans in the fighting pits of Kara Station, forced to battle each other, and alien beasts for the entertainment of species, who saw them as nothing more than animals they had found. Humans hidden in cargo containers and sealed and forgotten. Cryochambers and living in the ventilation shafts of space. Stations that did not even know they existed, and each time they found them, Kale asked the same question, will you fight? Some said yes and joined his small but growing band of survivors, while others were too broken and too afraid to do anything but run and hide. But Kale never blamed them for their fear, because he understood it better than anyone. He understood what it meant to lose everything. The message came through on a stolen communicator while they were drifting through an asteroid field, hiding from a Vrac-3 patrol that had come too close for comfort. Velthax-9, a voice said, scratchy and distorted by distance, but unmistakably human. Labor camp in the northern hemisphere, 43 humans still alive. Guards change shift at the third moonrise. Please help us. Kale looked at his crew, now numbering 15 after months of searching and rescuing, and saw the same determination in their eyes that burned in his own heart. We go, he said. And no one argued. Velthax-9 was a prison moon orbiting a gas giant so massive that it blocked half the sky. Its surface covered in mines and processing plants where prisoners from a dozen species worked until they died. The labor camp sat in a valley between two mountains of ore, surrounded by fences that hummed with enough electricity to kill anything that touched them, and guard towers that swept the grounds with searchlights. Throughout the long night, Kale and his team landed their ship in a canyon 3 kilometers away and made the rest of the journey on foot, crawling through tunnels and maintenance shafts that the Vrac-3 had long forgotten about. They reached the camp just as the third moon rose over the horizon, and Kale watched through his scope as the guards began their shift change, leaving gaps in the patrol patterns that a trained soldier could exploit. Remember, he whispered to his team, we get them out quietly if we can. But if we are discovered, then we fight our way out, and we do not leave anyone behind. They moved like ghosts through the darkness. Taking out guards was silent. Weapons and cutting through fences with tools they had stolen from 100 different worlds. The humans they found inside the camp were barely recognizable as the same species that had once built cities among the stars, their bodies thin and scarred, and their eyes empty of everything except pain. But when Kale knelt beside them and spoke in the language they had not heard from a friendly voice in months, something flickered back to life behind those empty eyes. We are getting you out of here, he said to an old man who had once been an engineer on one of Earth's great colony ships. Can you walk? The old man grabbed Kale's arm with surprising strength and looked into his face with tears streaming down his cheeks. You are real, he whispered. I thought we were the last ones. I thought everyone was gone. Not everyone, Kale said as he helped the man to his feet. Not yet. They had almost made it to the perimeter fence when the alarms began to scream. Searchlights swept across the compound and guards poured out of the barracks, their weapons raised and their voices shouting orders in the harsh clicking language of the Vrac-3. Team opened fire and chaos erupted across the camp. plasma bolts lighting up the darkness as prisoners screamed and guards fell and everything descended into madness. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and there was no way they should have survived. But Kale had learned something important in the 6 months since Earth fell. Humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. They fought their way toward defense, dragging wounded prisoners and covering each other's retreat. And Kale found himself backed against a wall with enemies closing in from 3 sides and no clear path to escape. Reached into his pack and pulled out the flag. It was dirty and torn at the edges from months of travel, but the colors were still visible in the light of the burning guard towers. Still recognizable to every human eye that saw them, Kale unfurled the flag and held it high above his head. And the effect was like nothing he had ever seen. The prisoners who had been cowering in fear suddenly stood up, their eyes fixed on the banner that they had thought lost forever. And something changed in their broken bodies that could not be explained by logic or reason. They began to fight old men who could barely walk, picked up fallen weapons, and charged at guards twice their size, while women who had been beaten down for months screamed defiance and threw themselves at their captors with a fury that made this Racthory stumble backward in shock. The guards had expected broken slaves, not warriors reborn. Kale led the charge through the gap his people had created, the flag still flying above him like a beacon in the darkness. And behind him came 43 humans who had remembered what it meant to be free. They reached the ship and lifted off just as Racthory reinforcements arrived. And Kale stood at the viewport watching the prison moon shrink behind them while the rescued prisoners gathered around him in silence. The old engineer approached him slowly, his eyes still fixed on the flag that Kale had draped over his shoulders like a cape. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "A general gave it to me," Kale replied. "She told me that someone had to remember what we were." The old man reached out and touched the fabric with trembling fingers. And when he looked up at Kale, there were tears in his eyes, but also something else. Something that Kale had not seen in a human face since before the fall of Earth. "Hope. Word will spread," the old man said. "The others will hear about this, about the man who carries the flag and comes to save his people. And they will find you." Kale looked at the flag and thought about General Concours and everyone else he had lost. And he knew that the old man was right. He had not planned to become a symbol, had not wanted to be anything more than a soldier doing his duty. But the galaxy had taken everything else from him, and this was what remained: a flag, a mission, and a fire that refused to die. "Then we will be ready for them," Kale said as he looked out at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. "Because this is only the beginning." Somewhere out in the darkness of space, other humans heard the story of what happened on Velthax 9 and began to whisper a name that the Racthory Dominion would soon learn to fear. The man with the last flag of Earth was coming, and wherever he walked, humanity rose again. The Racthory High Command received the first reports about the human with the flag, exactly 8 months after they had declared humanity extinct. And they laughed. A single human carrying a piece of cloth was not a threat. They said in their Grand Council chambers on the throne world of Calyx Prime, it was a joke, a desperate act of defiance by a species that was already dead and simply too stupid to stop moving. They were wrong, and their laughter would cost them everything. In the 18 months since Velthax 9, Kale Morrow had transformed from a lone survivor into something far more dangerous than any weapon the Dominion had ever faced. He had become a symbol. The stories spread through the underground networks that connected the scattered survivors of humanity like veins carrying blood through a wounded body. Stories of the man who appeared from nowhere with the flag of Earth flying above him. Stories of slaves set free and oppressors brought low, and humans who had forgotten how to hope, learning to dream. Again, they called his movement the Ember Resistance, because like embers they had survived the fire that was meant to destroy them, and now they were Beginning to glow again, Kale stood in the command center of their hidden base on an asteroid that did not appear on any Dominion map. Surrounded by screens that showed the locations of human survivors across 3 sectors of space. And he tried to wrap his mind around how much had changed, where once he had led 11 frightened soldiers through the sewers of Geneva. Now he commanded a network of over 3,000 humans who had pledged themselves to the cause of their species. Survival new faces had joined the core leadership in recent months. People whose skills and courage had made the impossible dream of resistance into something real. Dr. Sana Oilran was a xenobiologist who had been conducting research on a remote station when the Dominion attacked. And she had spent the past 2 years hiding among alien merchants, while secretly studying every piece of Racthori technology she could find, learning how it worked and how it could be turned against its creators. She was 41 years old with kind eyes and steady hands, and she had already developed modifications that allowed human weapons to pierce Racthori armor that was supposed to be invincible. Commander Dmitry Volkov was a ghost who had returned from the dead, a starship tactician who the Dominion believed they had killed at the Battle of Mars, but who had actually been rescued by a passing trader and spent months in a medical coma before finding his way to the resistance. Was 56 and built like a bear. Was fought boat is bought major medieval and was 56 and built with a thick gray beard and a mind that could calculate battle strategies faster than any computer. And he had already planned 17 successful raids against Dominion supply lines using tactics that made the aliens question everything they thought they knew about human warfare. "We have confirmation," Dmitry said as he pointed to one of the screens, his deep voice filling the command center. "The convoy carrying power cells to the Racthori fleet will pass through the Narith system in 42 hours. And their escort is only 3 patrol ships. It is a trap," Sana said without looking up from the Racthori scanner she was dismantling. "They've been leaving convoys underprotected for weeks now, hoping we will take the bait." Kale studied the screen and felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. The weight of knowing that whatever decision he made could mean life or death for people who trusted him. "What do you recommend?" he asked. Because he had learned that the best leaders were the ones who listened. Dmitry smiled, the expression making his scarred face look almost friendly for a moment. "We take the bait," he said. "But we bring teeth they are not expecting." The raid on the Narith convoy became legendary among the scattered survivors of humanity. A story that was told and retold until it grew into something almost mythical. Kale led the assault personally, standing on the bridge of their captured frigate with the flag mounted behind him where every camera could see it. And when the Racthori trap was sprung, he sprang one of his own. Dmitry had hidden 3 additional ships in the asteroid field nearby. Vessels crewed by humans who had once been prisoners and slaves, but who had learned to fight with a desperation that no comfortable soldier could match. The Racthori reinforcements arrived, expecting to find a small band of rebels caught in their net, and instead found themselves caught in a crossfire that destroyed half their ships before they could even raise their shields. Footage of the battle leaked onto the Galactic network within hours, spreading from station to station and world to world faster than any official broadcast. It showed Kale on the bridge of his ship with the flag flying behind him, his voice calm and steady as he directed the battle. That should have been impossible to win. It showed humans fighting with courage and skill that the galaxy had been told no longer existed. It showed species that refused to die. The effect was immediate and widespread, reaching far beyond anything Kale could have predicted on mining colonies across Dominion space. Human slaves who had given up hope saw the footage and began to whisper to each other, began to remember that they were more than just property on space stations where humans lived in hiding. People who had spent years afraid to even speak their own language gathered in secret to watch the flag fly and feel something stir in their heart's own worlds belonging to species who had their own reasons to hate the Dominion. Merchants and traders who had shown kindness to humans in the past began leaving supplies in hidden locations, began finding ways to help without drawing attention to themselves, even among the alien races who were not part of the Dominion. There were those who watched the footage with interest, who saw in humanity's desperate struggle a reflection of their own histories and their own hopes. The Rithani Collective was an ancient species who had ruled a vast empire before the Vractri existed, and they had been conquered and reduced to a shadow of their former glory by the very coalition that now hunted humanity. They had watched in silence as the Dominion committed atrocity after atrocity, bound by treaties and fear to do nothing while worlds burned. But something in the image of that flag, in the face of that human soldier who refused to accept defeat, stirred memories in the Rithani that they had thought long dead. The Dominion noticed the change, noticed the growing whispers and the increasing boldness of human raids, and the way their slaves looked at them, with eyes that no longer held only fear. And finally, the High Command stopped laughing. "This symbol must be destroyed," Arkham Vyeth Karath declared to the assembled council, his tall insectoid form casting a shadow across the chamber like a promise of death. "This human with his flag must be made an example, so that every slave and every rebel remembers what happens to those who dare to defy the Dominion." The hunt for Kale Morrow began in earnest, with resources and attention that had never been directed at a single individual in the history of the Vractri Empire. But as the Dominion gathered its forces and prepared to crush the spark of rebellion before it could become a fire, Kale stood in his command center and looked at the flag that had started it all. He had never wanted to be a symbol, had never asked for the burden of carrying the hopes of his entire species on his shoulders. But he understood now that it was too late for second thoughts. The ember had been lit, and either it would grow into a flame that burned the Dominion to ashes, or it would be snuffed out forever. Either way, Kale knew. The galaxy would never forget that humanity had refused to go quietly into extinction. They had fought back, and that was enough to change everything. The crackdown came like a storm that had been building for months, and when it finally broke, nearly destroyed everything the Ember Resistance had. Biltarkhan Vyeth Karath himself took command of the operation, pulling ships and soldiers from across the Dominion to hunt down the human with the flag. And he prosecuted his war with a cruelty that shocked even those who had witnessed the fall of Earth. The bounty on Kale Morrow's head reached a number so high that it could have purchased a small moon. And suddenly, every bounty hunter and mercenary in the galaxy was searching for him. Specialized hunter-killer units were deployed. Elite Vractri soldiers trained specifically to track and eliminate human targets, equipped with technology that could detect human biological signatures from orbit. And for every victory the Resistance claimed, 3 hideouts were discovered and destroyed. Kale stood in the ruins of what had been their medical facility on Terra 7 and looked at the bodies of the people he had failed to protect, his hands shaking with a rage that had nowhere to go. 63 humans had died here, including Dr. Sana's apprentice, who had been only 19 years old and had shown such promise in learning to adapt alien technology. The Dominion had not just killed them, they had made it public, broadcasting footage of the raid across every network to show the galaxy what happened to those who followed the flag of a dead world. "We cannot keep doing this," one of his lieutenants said. A young woman named Jira, who had been rescued from a fighting pit on Korath Station and still bore the scars of her time there. "Every time we think we are safe, they find us. Every time we think we have won, they make us pay for it tenfold." Kale had no answer for her, because she was right. The hit on their main base came 3 weeks later. A coordinated assault that breached their defenses before anyone even knew they were under attack. Kale was in a meeting with his senior commanders when the first explosion shook the asteroid. And by the time they reached the hangar bay, half the base was already in flames. "Get to the ships," Dmitri shouted as he fired his rifle at the Vrathuri soldiers pouring through the breach, his massive frame blocking the corridor like a wall of flesh and fury. "I will hold them here. We are not leaving you," Kale shouted back. But Dmitri just laughed and kept firing. "I was supposed to die at Mars," the old commander said, his voice calm even as plasma bolts screamed past his head. "I have been living on borrowed time ever since, and I will not waste it running when I can buy my people a chance to escape." Kale wanted to argue, wanted to drag Dmitri to the ship by force if necessary. But he saw the look in the old man's eyes and knew that there was nothing he could say. Some deaths could not be prevented. Only honored, make them pay for every step, Kale said. Gripping Dmitri's shoulder one last time, "I will make them remember my name," Dmitri replied. And then he turned back to face the enemy, and Kale ran for the ship with the survivors of his command. They were halfway to the rendezvous point when the sensor officer reported that Dmitri's life sign had gone dark. And Kale sat alone in his cabin and did not speak to anyone for hours. The losses continued to mount as the weeks turned into months' supply. Caches that had taken years to build were discovered and destroyed, while cells of resistance fighters that had operated in secret for months were exposed and eliminated. Friends Kale had bled beside were captured and tortured for information. And when they refused to talk, the Dominion executed them on live broadcasts that were designed to break the spirit of anyone watching. He saw the face of Jira on one of those broadcasts, beaten and bloody, but still defiant, still refusing to give up the locations of her fellow survivors, even as the Vrathuri executioner raised his weapon. "Long live humanity," she said. And those were the last words she ever spoke. The resistance that had once numbered over 3,000 was reduced to less than 500, scattered across dozens of hidden locations with no way to coordinate and no way to fight back against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Gale found himself alone in an empty cargo hold on a ship drifting through uncharted space, hiding from patrols while the last remnants of his people waited for orders he did not know how to give. He pulled the flag from his pack and unfolded it slowly, looking at the colors that had once meant so much and wondering if they still meant anything at all. How many had died for this piece of cloth? He asked himself how many more would die if he kept carrying it. Maybe the Dominion was right, he thought as his fingers traced the fabric that was worn thin from months of travel and battle. Maybe humanity's time was over, and the kindest thing he could do was let his people scatter and hide, and try to survive as individuals rather than as a species. Maybe it was time to burn the flag and let the symbol die. He was reaching for his lighter when the communication console on the wall lit up with an incoming message, encrypted with a code that the resistance did not use. Kale almost ignored it, assuming it was another Dominion trap, but something made him hesitate. Some instinct that had kept him alive through all the months of running and fighting. He accepted the message and a face appeared on the screen that made him reach for his weapon before he even realized what he was doing. It was a Rithani, one of the ancient species that had once ruled an empire and now existed in the shadow of the Dominion. Its elongated features and silver eyes impossible to read. "Kale Morrow," the Rithani said, its voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I am Ambassador Velith of the Rithani Collective, and I have been authorized to make you an offer." "Why would the Rithani help humans?" Kale asked, his hand still on his weapon. "Your people signed treaties with the Dominion. You stood by and watched while they burned our world." The ambassador's expression shifted in a way that might have been shame, or might have been something else entirely. "We watched because we were afraid," Velith said, "afraid that if we acted, the Dominion would finish what they started with our people centuries ago." But fear is a poison that eats away at everything it touches. And some of us have grown tired of being poisoned. The ambassador leaned forward, and Kale saw something in those silver eyes that he recognized. It was the same fire that had burned in General Okonkwo's eyes on the day she gave him the flag. The same desperate hope that refused to die no matter how dark things became. There are those among my people who believe that what the Dominion did to humanity was wrong. Veleth continued. And there are those who believe that if we do not stand against them now, we will eventually share your fate. But we cannot act alone. And we cannot act without proof that your species is worth the risk we would be taking. What kind of proof? Kale asked. Show us what humanity will sacrifice for freedom, the ambassador said. Show us that you are more than just survivors clinging to the wreckage of a dead civilization. Show us that the fire in your hearts is strong enough to light a path through the darkness. And we will give you sanctuary, ships, weapons, everything you need to continue your fight. The screen went dark and Kale sat alone in the cargo hold, staring at the flag in his hands and thinking about everything he had lost and everything that still remained. The Dominion wanted him to give up, wanted him to accept that humanity was finished and fade away into the darkness of history. But Kale remembered the look in Dimitri's eyes as he held the line so others could escape. Remembered the defiance in Jira's voice as she faced death without fear. Remembered every single person who had died, believing that the flag was worth fighting for. Folded the flag carefully and placed it back in his pack. And when he stood up, there was a new purpose burning in his heart. The Rithani wanted proof of what humanity would sacrifice for freedom, would give them something they would never forget. The message that Kale broadcast across every frequency the resistance could reach was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. This is Kale Morrow, bearer of the last flag of Earth, speaking to every human who still draws breath and every soul in this galaxy who has ever dreamed of freedom. In 72 hours, I will lead an assault on Calyx Prime, the throne world of the Vrat-3 Dominion, the heart of the Empire that tried to erase us from existence. I do not promise victory. I do not promise survival. I only promise that the galaxy will see what humanity is willing to sacrifice for the right to exist. And they will never forget us. The response exceeded anything Kale could have imagined, anything he had dared to hope for in his darkest moments. From hidden bases and scattered ships across 3 sectors of space, human survivors answered the call. Piloting vessels held together with salvage parts and desperate prayers toward the coordinates he'd provided, but they were not. Alanarithani warships emerged from territories that had not seen military action in over a century, their ancient weapons powered up and ready for a fight that their people had been avoiding for far too long. Free traders who had smuggled supplies to the resistance arrived in armed convoys, their captains standing on bridges and declaring that they were tired of watching good people die while they did nothing. Even defectors from Dominion vassal species appeared. Pilots and soldiers who had seen in humanity's stand a reflection of their own stolen courage and had decided that some things were worth dying for. By the time the fleet gathered at the rendezvous point, it numbered over 400 ships of every size and configuration, crewed by beings from a dozen different worlds who had all made the same choice. They would rather die fighting than live in a galaxy ruled by fear. Kale stood on the bridge of the flagship that the Rithani had provided, a vessel that had not seen combat since before his grandparents were born, but still hummed with power that made the deck vibrate beneath his feet. Dr. Sana Oilerin stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed the overwhelming forces defending Calyx Prime. The odds are not in our favor, she said quietly, stating the obvious because sometimes obvious things needed to be said. They never have been, Kale replied. And then he turned to address the crew and through them every ship in the fleet. We are not here to win a war, he said, his voice carrying through every speaker and every communicator. We are here to make a statement that will echo through history long after we are gone. We are here to show the Dominion and everyone watching that extinction is not the same as surrender. That killing us is not the same as defeating us. That the human spirit cannot be destroyed by weapons or cruelty or the passage of time. He paused and looked at the flag mounted behind him, at the colors that had survived the fall of Earth and the death of everyone he had ever loved. Today, we fight for everyone we have lost. He continued. For General Okonkwo, who gave me this flag and told me to remember what we were. For Commander Volkov, who held the line so others could escape. For Jira and the 63 on Terrath 7 and every other human who died believing that this moment would come. We carry them with us into battle. And we will make their sacrifice mean something. The fleet jumped to hyperspace and emerged in the heart of enemy territory, facing a defensive force that outnumbered them 3-1. The Battle of Calyx Prime began with fire and fury that lit up the darkness of Space. Kale commanded the assault with the same calm determination that had carried him through every impossible situation since Geneva, directing ships and coordinating attacks while plasma bolts filled the void around them. The Dominion fought with everything they had, but they were fighting an enemy that had already accepted death and found it liberating. Human pilots rammed their damaged ships into Vrakthuri carriers, buying time for others to break through the defensive lines. Rethani gunners fired weapons that had been silent for generations, rediscovering the warrior spirit that their ancestors had lost to fear. Freighter captains who had never fired a shot in anger became heroes, using their knowledge of Dominion shipping lanes to exploit weaknesses that military commanders had never noticed. And slowly, impossibly, the fleet pushed through the defenses and reached the throne world itself. Kale led the ground assault personally, dropping with a strike team of volunteers onto the surface of Calyx Prime while the battle raged in orbit above them. They fought through the streets of the capital city, a place so old and so proud that it had never known the touch of war. And the Vrakthuri who faced them could not understand how these humans kept coming no matter how many of them fell. The Grand Citadel rose before them like a mountain of black stone, the seat of power where the High Archons had ruled the Dominion. For millennia, Kale reached the gates with only a handful of his team still standing. And when the doors burst open, they found the council chamber filled with the rulers who had ordered humanity's extinction. Archon Vyeth Karath stood at the center of the room, his insectoid form towering over the humans who had somehow penetrated the heart of his empire. You cannot win, the Archon said, his voice filled with contempt and something that might have been fear. Even if you kill us all, more will take our place. The Dominion will never fall. Kale did not respond with words. He walked forward, ignoring the weapons pointed at him from every direction, and pulled the flag from his pack. The chamber fell silent as he unfurled it, as the colors of Earth spread out in the dim light of the alien world, as every eye in the room focused on this piece of cloth that had traveled so far and meant so much. Kale drove the pole into the stone floor of the citadel, driving it deep with a strength born of everything he had lost and everything he still believed in. You declared us extinct, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber and through the cameras that broadcast his image across 1,000 worlds. You burned our planet and killed our people and tried to erase us from history. But you failed, because as long as one human draws breath, as long as one person remembers what this flag stands for, we will never be gone. The Archon raised his weapon, and Kale did not flinch. You can kill me, Kale said. You can kill everyone in this fleet, but you cannot kill what we represent. You cannot destroy the idea that every being in this galaxy has the right to be free. And that idea will spread and grow, and eventually it will burn your Dominion to ashes. The shot came before Kale could say anything more, and he fell beside the flag he had carried for so long, but the image had already gone out across the galaxy, broadcast to every screen and every terminal by allies who had planned for this moment. the image of a human soldier, bloodied and defiant, planting the last flag of Earth in the heart of enemy territory, while an empire trembled around him. It was an image that would change everything. Dr. Sana Oilerin escaped the battle with the remnants of the fleet, and she returned to Kelix Prime 3 months later when the chaos of revolution made it possible. She found the flag still standing in the council chamber, untouched by the Vractari, who had been too afraid of what it represented to remove it. She took it home. The Dominion did not fall that day, but it fractured in ways that could never be repaired. Vassal species who had been quiet for generations rose up against their masters. Inspired by the impossible stand at Kelix Prime, Rithani formally recognized the Ember Resistance as a legitimate government in exile, giving humanity a voice in galactic politics for the first time since Earth fell within a decade. Humans had reclaimed their first colony world, building a new civilization from the ashes of the old. Within a century, they returned to Earth itself, finding a planet that had begun to heal from the wounds the Dominion had inflicted. The flag that Kale Morrow had carried from the ruins of Geneva hung in the restored United Nations building, watched over by an honor guard that never left its post. Beneath it, carved into stone that would last for millennia, were words that told the story of a species that had refused to die. They called us extinct, we called ourselves human, and we never stopped rising. The story of Kale Morrow was taught to children across the galaxy, human and alien alike, a reminder that one person with courage and conviction could change the course of history. And somewhere in the stars, in hidden corners of space where survivors had gathered to rebuild their civilization, the Ember Resistance continued to grow, carrying forward the torch that Kale had lit with his sacrifice. They were no longer embers. They were a flame that would never be extinguished, and whenever they looked at the flag that flew above their ships and stations and colonies, they remembered the man who had borne it through the darkness and shown the galaxy what humanity was made of. His name was Kale Morrow. He carried the last flag of Earth, and he became the symbol of resistance that united a galaxy against tyranny. This was his legacy, and it would burn forever.